are talking Rose Red, also known as Stephen King's Rose Red. This is a 2002 3-episode mini-series. Now, this was once conceived as a movie that was going to be directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Stephen King. However, the two couldn't quite get on the same page creatively. Steven Spielberg wanted to make much more of a high-octane action-style movie, whilst King wanted a slow-burn, more cerebral project. So that first incarnation never happened. But we got this one, which was written by King as a 3-episode mini-series, with each episode running about about 1 hour, 15 minutes per episode. So you can kind of watch this as a movie, but be prepared, it's going to be a long kind of sit. Now, this is ultimately a very comparable piece to the more recent series, things like Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, the Mike Flanagan series that were out kind of a few years ago. It's almost a precursor to them because it has a similar kind of flavour. But I mean, King's influence on this was clearly the real life case of the Winchester House, a famed kind of haunted house in its own right. And by King's own admission, he was a big fan of the House on Haunted Hill, which was kind of made into movies itself, including The Haunting. So this is his kind of his version of that kind of story. Now, the reason why I am actually recording this particular review is I thought I'll do a little bit of a tribute to Julian Sands, who, at the time of recording, is still missing. He went for a hike in January of 2023 in Mount Baldy in California, and I'm recording this in kind of mid-March and hasn't been seen since. So at this point, it's kind of presumed that he is dead. I mean, you never know, but it's not looking good at this point. So I thought I would review a Julian Sands project, even though he's not the star. Nancy Travis is really the kind of the main character here, but nonetheless, I thought I would talk about a Julian Sands project. Now, what is the story? Now, like I said, it stars Nancy Travis, who is a college lecturer called Joyce, and she teaches classes about the paranormal, the supernatural, parapsychology, and things like this. And her kind of project, her dream project, is to go into this famed haunted house called Rose Red, which is renowned for having a particular bloody past. So she gathers up a team of psychics, all of whom have different abilities, and one of these psychics is played by Julian Sands. The star kind of psychic though is this teenage girl who is an autistic girl who very kind of has extreme social problems, but also is a very powerful psychic. I mean, think Jean Grey from the X-Men's kind of style psychic powers here. So they want to go into this house with the hopes of proving the kind of the supernatural, maybe awakening the currently dormant Rose Red, and see if they can get the life back into the house. However, once they are there, of course, things may be a little bit more dangerous than they initially anticipated, and this house seems to have all sorts of kind of malicious intent, including a variety of entities that are dwelling in this house. The house itself seems to be somewhat alive. It kind of seems to be growing over time and all on its own, and the rooms seem to be constantly changing and things like that. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. Or I should say mini-series, because it's these days you can watch it as a kind of a movie, but ultimately it was originally a mini-series. Now, this was a project that had, when it started, had a budget of around $3 million, but it ended up being far more than that because of the very elaborate sets and kind of things like that. I think it was actually more or less nearly $30 million kind of budget when it was all said and done. So one of the big things I would say about this series, one of its kind of main plus points here, is some fantastically gothic looking, creepy sets. I mean, a lot of this stuff was practically built, and obviously we have our actors, acting within it, because it's really before the advent of a lot of CGI. There is a bit of CGI in here, and we'll talk about it. But the vast majority of sets here are kind of practical, and they look fantastic. And it's built to clearly kind of look quite strange, but also have elements of kind of like, classic Gothic architecture here. But the actual kind of the visuals that surround the property of this Rose Red, look fantastic. I mean, it's your kind of, your archetypal haunted house, really. Everything you got there, the overgrown kind of garden full of statues, the weird kind of architecture within the kind of the house, and strange kind of rooms and etc. Including a huge room with full of mirrors, all that sort of stuff. So there's some really kind of great sets here, and the idea of this house and kind of how it's kind of interpreted on the actual series itself, I think is pretty good. I mean, we see the external shots, and they tend to be kind of like things like matte paintings and a little bit of model work. But you know, even though it's it's because it's a TV budget, 2002, yeah, it's kind of jaded somewhat. But looking at it today's standards, but I still think it was very good. I think the cast here do a pretty good job. There is some kind of like hokey dialogue, which we'll come on to, but I don't think the cast do a bad job here. There are some kind of fun characters. I mean, we get quite a mix of kind of quirky, kind of psychic characters here within this kind of group, and we get a couple of other people who end up there as well. So there are some kind of fun characters, and we do have some characters here that I won't say exactly who take more of a kind of a darker turn, and kind of, you know, we see the kind of the ugliness of the human condition, you know, through just selfishness and kind of own self-interest and things like that. There's plenty of kind of supernatural elements here, and because this kind of series is 3 episodes, it kind of acts as your 3 acts of what you would normally kind of see in a movie. The first episode is more or less a kind of the introductions, and in fact our main characters don't even kind of go into the house until right at the end of that kind of first episode. But I've got to say, I think the first episode to me was actually the strongest, because it kind of gave you some interesting backstories about all these kind of like quirky kind of characters, and I have to say I thought the setup was extremely kind of strong. There are some kind of strong visual choices in regards to some of the kind of the supernatural elements here. There's a great sequence where kind of a garden sort of stone statue kind of comes alive, and a few kind of sequences including these kind of skeletal, spectral images that kind of haunt these kind of passageways. Things like the lighting and the cinematography, I think it's also pretty well done here. What doesn't work, I think this movie, or this kind of series, depending on how you're watching it, feels a little bit over bloated, to be honest. I mean, it's a long running time, and you do feel this movie sags, particularly kind of in the second episode. Ultimately, it would really be the kind of the second act, if this were movie terms. It feels particularly kind of over bloated in that section. There are some good elements to that particular episode, but to me that one really does kind of slow the roll a little bit. I mean, it's a long, you know, an hour and 20-minute kind of episode in its own right, with little happening. There is a lot of kind of sitting down talking with characters, and it does seem to kind of go over the same points over and over again. This is one of the things where I feel maybe a movie format might have been better, because you do feel you tread the same ground multiple times with this kind of series. I have to say also, and this is true of a lot of, I think, of Stephen King adaptations, the ending is a little weak. I didn't think the ending was particularly strong. I can say that sometimes is true of certain kind of King adaptations or King stories in general. Some of the characters, you know, they're a little bit hammy, even though they're quite fun. They are a little bit hammy, and there is some I've got to say, some clunky dialogue here. Especially as you kind of head towards the end of this kind of like this series with the 3rd episode. Some of the dialogue here is particularly kind of like unnatural sounding. The effects haven't aged well. This started to, you know, CGI was starting to come into the kind of the entertainment medium at this point. There are some kind of, you know, some low budget kind of, or at least it looks like it by today's standards, some early kind of CGI, some early kind of VFX that really haven't aged particularly well. And I saw this when it came out, and even then I didn't think it was particularly kind of strong. Ultimately, the series or movie, depending how you're watching it, it's interesting and it has some good elements, but it feels a little overstuffed. It doesn't feel particularly kind of gripping, I don't think. I think the actual first episode was personally the strongest, but that had the least amount of kind of supernatural stuff in it, to be honest. But I thought the character work was strong in that one. The second episode drags. There's a couple of highlights in it, and the 3rd episode, which is the kind of the finale, again, it has some elements, but it doesn't quite stick the landing. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.